Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. As you all know, my name is Shuaib Abdullahi, but most people call me Babs Bush. This is the salat guide. This is the video for the salat guide concerning the salat according to the Quran, and I'm going to show you the proofs concerning how the salat is done according to the Quran. So whoever has watched my lectures previously concerning the salat of the Quran, which you can find on YouTube or Facebook, you find me by the name Bush2G9. You see all the procedures and the evidences concerning what the Quran commands you. So as it goes, I will show you the postures of the salat. We have the standing posture, we have the bowing down posture, and then we have the prostration posture. Three postures of the salat. Then I will show you what needs to be done according to the Quran. So first of all, when you are about to start your prayer, when you are standing in the standing position, which I'll give you the evidence concerning that, I have to read some few verses for you according to chapter 29 verse 45. It says, recite what has been inspired to you of the book and establish the prayer. Recite what has been inspired to you of the book and establish the prayer. And this was addressed to Muhammad alayhi salam. You can see it's a second person pronoun, that is alayka, ilayka, right? So he says, atlu ma uhiya ilayka min al-kitab wa aqimus salat, right? Atlu ma uhiya ilayka min al-kitab wa aqimus salat. So for instance, when you go to chapter 33 verse 21 of the Quran, Surah Al-Ahzab, where he says, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. So this is the example. God has given you an example in the messenger, a clear example, that is a good pattern and a good example in the messenger of God. So the messenger of God, whatever commands he has been commanded in the Quran, that is what me and you have to follow. So according to chapter 29 verse 45, it says, recite what has been inspired to you, Muhammad, of the book and establish the prayer. So whatever you have to do in the prayer, you must recite from the book of God, that is the Al-Quran. So when you go to chapter 17 verse 110, it says, and وَلَا تَجَهَرْ بِصَلَاتِكَ وَلَا تُخَافِتْ بِهَا وَابْتَغِي بَيْنَ ذَلِكَ سَبِيلًا. You can see he's still talking to Muhammad alayhi salam. He says, and do not be loud with your prayer, you Muhammad, do not be loud with your prayer, nor be silent with it, but seek a way in between. So it means Muhammad alayhi salam, whatever he did in his salat, he recited it from the Quran, and then he was neither loud nor silent. So he was in between, just a moderate tone. So according to chapter 72 verse 18, it says, وَأَنَّ الْمَسَاجِدَ لِلَّهِ فَلَا تَدْعُوا مَعَ اللَّهِ أَحَدًا. It says, and that the mosques are for God. The mosques, that is a place of worship, a place of prostration, are for God. So do not invoke anyone with God, with Allah. You are not supposed to invoke anyone along with God. That is the first rule here. So when you go to the mosque you are going to pray has to be dedicated to God, nobody else. So according to chapter 20, Surah Al-Taha, verse 11 to verse 12, you have to be barefooted when you are standing in front of God. When you go to the mosque, you have to be barefooted because the mosque belongs to God. So according to chapter 24, verse 36, it says, فِي بُيُوتٍ أَذْنَ اللَّهَ أَن تُرْفَعَ وَيُذْكَرَ فِيهَا اسْمُهُ يُسَبِّحُ لَهُ فِيهَا بِالْغُدُوِّ وَالْآصَالِ. Right? In the houses God has permitted to be raised in order to mention his name therein and glorify him in the, both in the morning and evening. And glorify his name both in the morning and evening. So that is the house we are supposed to call God. That is the mosque. So God, according to God, he commanded Moses. When Moses came to meet him, he told him to take off his sandals. So by you taking the examples, just like God just tells you in chapter 6 verse 19, أُولَٰئِكَ الَّذِينَ أَدَاءَ اللَّهُ فَبِهُدَاهُمْ اقْتَدِي. So when you are following the footsteps of the messengers and the prophet, you have to do just as they are commanded. So you go to the mosque, you have to take off your sandals. Now, so when you go to chapter 7 verse 29, God is saying, tells the messenger to say, my Lord commands to justice and to erect your faces at every mosque and invoke him, being sincere to him in religion. So when you are about to start your prayer, whilst you are standing in the mosque, you have to erect your face looking straight, right? And invoke him, to invoke God, because the salat you are going to do has to do with invocation. You are going to call on God. That's why it says, وَأَنَّ الْمَسَاجِدَ لِلَّهِ فَلَا تَدْعُوا مَعَ اللَّهِ أَحَدًا. So now to start with the procedure, it starts with the standing position. in the standing position, the reason why it is in the standing position, God says, Hafizu ala salawat wa salatul wusta wa qumu lillahi qanitin, according to chapter 2, verse 238, Surah Al-Baqarah. Right? So all the prayers we are going to do, the salawat, God has given you. He gave us 3 prayers in the Quran. 2 are farad, and the 1 is nafila in the night. Now, so the salatul wusta, salatul isha, and salatul fajr, these are the 3 prayers only God has given you in the Quran. So now, in the standing position where it says waqumu lillahi qanitin, you have to stand obediently in front of God. Whether you are standing with the hand crossed, whether you are standing with the hand backwards, whether you are standing straight, it has to be obediently. It doesn't matter the way you want to stand, but so far as you are standing obediently before God. So according to chapter 3, verse 39, Zechariah did the same. He was standing in prayer. And according to chapter 3, verse 113, Surah Al-Imran, verse 113, right? Among the people of the book, there are those who stand in the night reciting the verses of God and they prostrate, right? So now it says Hafizu ala salawatu wa salatul wusta wa qumu lillahi qanitin. So we start with the first posture, that's the standing position. Then it says what? So whenever you read the Quran, then seek protection with God against the devil. Now your salat you are going to do is full of recitation of the Quran and reading of the Quran. Whatever you are going to do has to come from the Quran. So according to God, chapter 16, verse 98, whenever you are going to read the Quran, you have to seek refuge with God against the devil. So by this I say, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. I seek refuge with God against the rejected, the devil, the rejected, the accursed devil, right? So now I'm starting. So by saying A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, after that, you go to chapter 6, verse 162 to 163. Let's use the messenger as an example. God told him to say, Kul, inna salati wa nusuki wa mahaya wa mamati lillahi rabbil alamin la sharika lahu. What does it mean? He says, indeed, my prayer, because the salat you are about to stand for is dedicated to God. So you say, my prayer, my religious right, that is nusuk, right? And then what? That is nusuk. And then wamahiyaya, that is my life. Wamamati, and death. Lillahi rabbil alamin, belong to God, the Lord of the world. La sharika lahu, he has no partner, he has no associate, right? So by saying this, if I'm praying alone or whether in the group can know that my prayer, everything is dedicated to Allah, the God, the Lord of the universe. Similarly, if I'm going to pray, I know this prayer I'm going to do is dedicated to God. Remember, we are using the messenger as a good pattern. Now, apart from that, while standing, after saying A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim and saying this in the salati wa nusuki wa mahaya wa mamati lillahi rabbil alamin, now I'm starting my prayer. But what happens? God, according to chapter 17, verse 110, God says what? Say, Kul adu Allah aw adu Rahman ayyama tadu falawul asma'ul husna. Now I need to call on God, God's name, to pray. Now God is telling me, invoke the God or invoke the gracious. Whichever you invoke, then to him belongs the best name. So God has the best names, Asma'ul Husna, and he has given you these names in the Quran. So according to chapter 7, verse 180, he says, and to God belongs the best name, so invoke him by them. Invoke him by them, by those names. This is the command of God. So if you are coming to call on God, he has given you the names you can call him with, not other names. Nothing like Allahu Akbar. God never gave you such. God says invoke him by his best names. So according to chapter 7, verse 180, he says, وَلِلَّهِ الْأَسْمَاءُ الْحُسْنَى فَأَدْعُوهُ بِهَا فَأَدْعُوهُ بِهَا. Call him by it. Invoke him by them, those names. So according to chapter 59, verse 22 to verse 24, you will see some of the best names of God in the Quran. So we go to chapter 87, verse 15. It says what? وَذَكَرَ أَسْمُ رَبِّي فَصَلَّى. Now you have to mention the name of your Lord and pray. You have to mention the name of your Lord and pray, because now you are starting the prayer, right? So now it doesn't matter whether you want to raise up your hands, whether you want to say like this and choose the name you want to mention. For instance, to use the names of God, you can choose any name you want. So for instance, for me, I use the word God is great, or God is the great, Allahul Kabir, or Allahu Kabir, or you can use Allahu Rahman or Allahu Rahim. Whichever best name you decide to use is allowed according to God. So now I use Allahul Kabir according to chapter 13, verse 9, Surah Al-Rad. You see the word Al-Kabir, God, well, that is one of the best names of God. This is the one I use to pray sometimes, or I use Ar-Rahman. So while standing, I can say Allahu Kabir whilst my hands are there, or I can just say Allahu Kabir. It's a sign of respect according to God. There is no mandatory command saying you have to lift your hand. No. Now, so while standing and I magnify the name of God, my commemorating mention the name of God to pray, now my prayer starts. Now remember, according to chapter 32 verse 15, only those who believe in our verses are those whom, when reminded thereby, they fall down in prostration and glorify with praise of their Lord, and they are not arrogant. So our prayer is going to consist of something like that. After mentioning the name of God, I'm going to recite the verses of God, or I'm going to remind myself of the verses of God. So likewise, if I'm in a group prayer and I'm the leader, I have to remind them, those people following me in the prayer, about the verses of God. But if I'm praying alone, I have to remind myself of the verses of God, but it has to be a communication between me and God. So I have to choose carefully which type of verses or surah I'm going to use to call on God. So according to chapter 3 verse 113, right, you can stand reciting the verses of God, or according to chapter 19 verse 58, if it is a group prayer, you can stand in front of a group and you recite the verses of God to them. After that, then you move into the other postures. Now, so for example, you can use Fatiha, chapter 1 of the Quran. You can use Fatiha to call on God or to recite the verses in that chapter. Then you can use chapter 113, Surah Al-Falaq. You can use chapter 114, Surah Al-Nas. Then you can use chapter 3, that is Surah Al-Imran, and you go to verse 26 to 27, where it says, Allahumma malik al-muluk. Then you can go to chapter 2, verse 255, that is Ayat al-Kursi, where it says, Allahu la ilaha illa huwa al-hayyul qayyum. Now, mind you, you can use any preferable language to communicate to God, so far as you have the Quran translated in your own language which you can understand. Right? So far as you are communicating to God, He understands every language. According to chapter 20, when you start reading from verse 10 downwards, Moses communicated with God in his own language. It doesn't mean he spoke Arabic language. No. So that is the case here. So according to chapter 73 verse 20, it says, فَقْرَأُوا مَا تَيَسَّرَ مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ. Read what is easy from the Quran. So when you're establishing your prayer, you always have to choose the easy chapters to read, not to cause stress for yourself, nor to those following you in prayer. So likewise, when you are going to the second posture, after choosing to recite Fatiha, let's say I've chosen Fatiha to read, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahmanir Rahim, Maliki Yawmiddin, Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in, Ihdina siratal mustaqim, siratal ladzina an'amta alayhim, ghayril maghdubi alayhim waladdallin. Now, then I move in the bowing down. So bowing down, before I go to the bowing down, according to chapter 22 verse 77, it says, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu arqa'u wasjudu wa'abdu rabbakum. O you who believe, bow down. And you can only bow down whilst you are standing. Because you cannot be sitting and you bow down. No. You are standing before you go to the bowing down posture. So by bowing down, I go like this. My knees and my head goes like that. So this is bowing down. Arqa'u. Arqa'u. So now I've bowed down. So now this bowing down position that I'm in, according to chapter 38 verse 24, Dawood, Prophet David bowed down in front of God. You are kharru raqi'an. He bowed down. Bow down means you are going down, to fall down, going on your knees and your head bowed like that. So that is called bow down, ruku'un, according to the Quran. So check chapter 38 verse 24. That is our prophet Dawood bow down in front of God. So according to chapter 17 verse 107, right, the believers are those when the verses of Ar-Rahman were recited to them, they fall down in prostration, right? Falling down is the bowing down, right? So this bowing down is another form of prostration, but it's different from putting your head down to the ground. So now we are going to see the next posture. So whilst you are bowing down, according to chapter 17 verse 108, you say, Subhana Rabbina in kana wa'du Rabbina lamaf'ula. Why? And they say, glory be to our Lord, indeed the promise of our Lord is effective. That is according to chapter 17 verse 108, in that bowing position. So then now you have to go by the prostration. So according to chapter 53 verse 62. It says, Fasjudu lillahi wa'abdun. So now this is where you go in the prostration to God. You are going to prostrate to God by putting your head here, forehead to the ground. That is the prostration. And this is where the worship has to start. So now, when I go like this with my head to the ground, I'm prostrating. So whilst you are in the prostration position, and this is where, according to chapter 48, verse 29 of the Quran, Surah Al-Fatih, this is when Muhammad and his people and the believers with him, you see them bowing down in prostration. Because from the bowing down on your knees like this, you are going in the prostration. According to chapter 17, verse 109, similarly. So from the bowing down, you go straight to the prostration. And the prostration, you have putting your forehead to the ground. So according to chapter 48, verse 29, this is what leaves the trademark on your forehead. And that is the same example in the Injil and the Torah. Go to chapter 48, verse 29, you see the evidence. So whilst your head is prostrated down to the ground, God says, فَسَبِّي بِحَمْدِ رَبِّكَ, right? You have to glorify God by singing his praises. So now whilst you are in the prostration, your head is on the ground, you can use glorification like Subhana Rabbi al-Ala, according to chapter 87, verse 1. You can use glorifications like Subhana Rabbi al-Azim, according to chapter 56, verse 94. You can use glorification like Tabaraka Ismi Rabbi Zil Jalali wal Ikram, according to chapter 55, verse 78. You can use La Quwwata Illa Billah, according to chapter 18, verse 39. You can use Hasbi Allahu, La ilaha illa huwa alayhi tawakkaltu wa huwa rabbul arshil azim, according to chapter 9, verse 129. Then you can use Astaghfirullah or Astaghfirullah, according to chapter 110, verse 3. Now, mind you, whilst you are in the prostration, your head is to the ground and you are singing all these praises glorifying God. Remember, according to chapter 40, verse 60, God says, and your Lord said, invoke me, I will respond to you. So ad'uni astajibu lakum. So now by you invoking God whilst in your prostration, remember, you are not shouting. You must have a moderate voice whilst in that position. Now, according to chapter 4, verse 36, it says, وَعَبُدُ اللَّهِ وَلَا تُشْرِكُ بِهِ شَيْئًا. You should worship your Lord and do not associate anything with him in the worship of your Lord. Similarly, in chapter 18, verse 110, it says, وَمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو لِقَاءَ رَبِّي فَلْيَعْمَلْ عَمَلَ صَالِحًا وَلَا يُشْرِكْ بِعِبَادَتِي رَبِّي أَحَدًا. So in the worship of your Lord, you are not supposed to include anyone or mention anyone's name to invoke him, just like some other people do in their prayer. That is called shirka. So you don't have to do any shirk in your prayer. Now, remember, according to chapter 2, verse 153 of Surah Al-Baqarah, it says, "O you who believe, seek help through patience and the prayer. And indeed, God is with those who are patient." That is what? Ya ayyuhallazina amanu ista'inu bis-sabr was-salat inna Allah ma'as-sabirin. So whilst you are in the prayer, whilst you are in the prostration, you can be seeking help. Ask God for a personal help that you need. Remember, in Fatiha, we tell God, Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. After worshiping God, you have to seek your help. You praise God, you seek your help from him. So after seeking your help, now you are about to bring the prayer to the end. What happens? According to chapter 17, verse 111, it says, "And say, praise be to God who does not have a son, nor does he have a partner in the dominion, nor does he have a guardian out of humiliation." Right? That is, Alhamdulillahi allazi lam yattakhiz walada, wa lam yakul lahu sharikun fi al-mulk, wa lam yakul lahu waliyyun min az-zulli. Now you are about to end the prayer. It tells you, according to chapter 17, verse 111, it says, وَكَبِّرْهُ تَكْبِيرًا. Now, whilst in the prostration, you are doing all this. Now you have to get up. You are going to get up. So, وَكَبِّرْهُ تَكْبِيرًا, you say, Allahu Kabir. God is great. You are ending. You are going to end. So, by saying God is great, you are getting up. Remember, according to chapter 4, verse 102 and chapter 50, verse 40, the prayer ends after prostration. The moment you ended prostration, your prayer has ended. But now that your prayer has ended, what are you supposed to signify the end of your prayer? According to chapter 10, verse 10, it says the end of the وَآخِرْ دَعْوَاهُمْ أَنِ الْحَمْدُ لِلَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. The believers of God, the end of their invocation is to say what? Praise be to God, Lord of the world. So remember, your prayer is full of invocation. Right? You are invoking God according to chapter 72, verse 18. According to chapter 7, verse 29. You are here to invoke God. Right? So you have Prayer is full of invocation. You're calling on God, right? So by saying Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, your prayer has ended. So similarly, now when the prayer ends, you choose to do what you want to do. According to chapter 62 verse 10, you can get up and go, but you have to do the zikr of God. According to chapter 4 verse 103, you can remember God while standing, sitting down, or lying on your sides. Still, you can do the zikr of God. Just like it says, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu azkurullah zikran kasiran. Then now this is how the prayer comes to an end. You are done, and you can see how simple it is according to the Quran. Ladies and gentlemen, remember, according to chapter 20 verse 2 to verse 3, ma anzalna alayka al-Qur'ana litashqa illa tazkiratan liman yakhsha. My name is Shuaib Abdullahi. Thank you very much for paying attention with me. Assalamu alaikum.